Oscar Piastri did everything a driver could reasonably be expected to do. He took pole with a convincing margin, won the sprint, and controlled the Qatar Grand Prix with a level of execution that left very little room for criticism. The only reason the result slipped away was a strategic decision made on the pit wall. When the safety car emerged on lap 7, every major team took the obvious opportunity to pit. McLaren chose not to. That single call handed Max Verstappen the ideal race structure and forced Piastri into a recovery drive that never should have been necessary in the first place. What makes this situation more significant is that it wasn't an isolated incident. Throughout the season, Piastri has repeatedly found himself on the wrong end of decisions that, intentionally or not, compromised his result. Whether through pit sequencing, cautious strategy choices, or split-second calls taken too late, the pattern is difficult to ignore. McLaren frame all of this under their Papaya Rules philosophy, a commitment to fairness and internal balance. On paper, the idea is reasonable. In practice, it has often limited Piastri more than Norris, especially on weekends where Piastri has been the one with stronger pace. With the championship narrowing and Verstappen capitalising on every opening, the core question becomes increasingly unavoidable. Are McLaren inadvertently giving Verstappen opportunities that should never exist? And is an unspoken favouring of Norris becoming visible despite the team's public stance? Subscribe so you don't miss the full breakdown as we dig into the implications of this pattern. In Qatar, the mechanics of how the win slipped away are straightforward. Piastri had dominated the weekend, winning the sprint and then starting the Grand Prix from pole. He made a confident launch and controlled the race during the opening phase while Verstappen moved past Norris into second. When Nico Hülkenberg collided with Pierre Gasly and triggered the safety car on lap 7, the path ahead should have been simple. With 2 mandatory pit stops due to Pirelli's stint length limits, every team benefited from making an early stop under safety car conditions. Verstappen came in immediately, as did the Ferraris, Mercedes, and virtually everyone else. In the moment that mattered most, McLaren stayed out with both cars. Andrea Stella later explained that double stacking would have held Norris in the pits and that the team did not anticipate such a unanimous response from the field. But whatever the internal logic, the external effect was clear. They removed themselves from the optimal strategy. Once the race restarted, Piastri and Norris were the only front-runners on older tyres, obliged to run long, uneven stints, inevitably losing time before finally making their first stops. Piastri rejoined with too much ground to realistically recover the lead without an unlikely collapse from Verstappen. He drove superbly regardless, reducing what had been a 17-second gap to under 8 by the flag, but the victory was gone, and with it, the opportunity to close dramatically on Norris in the standings. Stella was candid afterwards, saying, "We got it wrong. We lost the victory with Oscar, and we lost the podium with Lando." Zak Brown was equally direct. "We clearly made a huge mistake." Piastri summed up the situation in fewer words but with equal weight. On the radio he said simply, "I don't have any words." Max Verstappen, meanwhile, acknowledged how decisive the call had been. "That's a very lovely race," he said afterwards, aware that the outcome played perfectly into his hands. His 5th title, once seemingly out of reach, suddenly looked feasible again. Qatar mattered not only because of the lost win, but because of where it occurred in the wider narrative. If Piastri had taken victory as expected, he would have closed the championship deficit to single digits heading into Abu Dhabi. Instead, he ended the night 16 points behind Norris and 4 behind Verstappen. Norris, who entered the weekend with a 24-point margin over both rivals, could have ended the title fight entirely had he won. By finishing 4th instead, he left the championship open, with 3 drivers separated by only 16 points. All 3 have 7 wins this season, making the final race effectively decisive. Piastri's frustration is understandable given how often momentum has slipped away in ways not entirely of his own making. Earlier in the season at Monza, the team chose to reverse the pit sequence, bringing Piastri in before Norris despite the Australian being ahead on track. After a slow stop for Norris later in the race, Piastri was asked to swap positions with him. It was presented as a corrective to offset the time Norris had lost, but it was another moment where Piastri had pace to fight for more, yet ended up conceding track position for internal stability. In Singapore, contact between the 2 drivers at the start resulted in Piastri being the one asked to accept the situation as fair racing, even as the incident compromised his opening laps. In Hungary, Piastri's pace was strong enough to challenge for the win, yet strategy choices ultimately placed him behind Norris for much of the race, with the internal logic again framed around maintaining options for both drivers. The Las Vegas disqualification hit both drivers equally, but in terms of championship impact, it cost Piastri more relative to Norris. Across these scattered events, the pattern that emerges is not of a team intentionally undermining one driver, but of a structure that consistently avoids decisive calls, even when circumstances would justify them. McLaren insist repeatedly that there is no favouritism, and they may genuinely believe that. Stella said in Qatar they are both in position to win the championship. There has often been a situation in Formula One where the third driver wins the championship. We have to respect Oscar has his chance to win, and we will let them race. That line reflects the team's commitment to an idealistic form of equality, even at the sharp end of a title fight. Zak Brown also commented earlier in the season that he would rather see Verstappen win than decide the championship through team orders between Norris and Piastri. I'd rather we did the best we can and our drivers tied on points and the other guy beat us by ones than the alternative. We're racers. We're going racing. The challenge is that in elite sport, idealism rarely survives contact with competitive reality. Verstappen's camp, led by Hannah Schmitz on strategy, make hard calls without hesitation, they engineering victory structures around their lead driver with ruthless clarity. McLaren, in contrast, risk undermining their title bid because they are reluctant to embrace the same hierarchy. Even if Piastri and Norris are evenly matched, and the season suggests they are, the absence of prioritization means compromises fall somewhere. Too often that somewhere has been Piastri. The external perception of favoritism is exacerbated by moments that fuel narrative rather than data. Footage from Qatar qualifying appeared to show muted celebrations on Norris's side of the garage when Piastri took pole. Fans amplified this into a theory of internal bias. The fuller picture is more mundane. Piastri's side of the garage did celebrate, while the other side showed the disappointment expected when your own driver is beaten to pole. Nothing in the references indicates a deeper split, but in a season as tight as this one, optics matter, and these moments add to the narrative weight. The decisive question is how McLaren respond heading into Abu Dhabi. Norris leads on 408 points, Verstappen follows with 396, and Piastri sits on 392. Norris secures the championship with a top 3 finish. Verstappen wins the title if he wins the race, and Norris finishes 4th or lower. For Piastri, the equation is simple and brutal. He must win. If he does, Norris must finish 6th or worse, and Verstappen must not be ahead of Piastri. Any other combination ends the Australians' campaign. Stella said that McLaren would not alter their approach for the finale. We always want to keep both options open for both drivers, he reiterated. That means no team orders unless one driver is mathematically eliminated. As things stand, neither is. This leaves the team vulnerable to the same structural indecision that cost them in Qatar. If they maintain symmetrical strategy in a race where Verstappen is likely to run aggressively, they risk conceding a title that should have been locked away already given the raw pace of the MCL 38. McLaren have already clinched the Constructors' Championship with 6 races to spare, yet their driver's title is now under threat. For Piastri, the implications reach beyond one race. He has shown throughout the season that he is capable of matching Norris and occasionally surpassing him on outright pace. But if the team's operating structure continues to expose him to the greater risk in tight strategic moments, there will come a point where the competitive cost becomes unsustainable. McLaren's internal policies are designed to prevent conflict. Ironically, the very approach intended to protect harmony may be the one that ultimately generates the most tension. The final race will therefore test not just the 3 drivers, but the philosophy of McLaren itself. Fairness is admirable, but Formula One has rarely rewarded teams who treat both drivers identically in a title fight. If Qatar was the warning, Abu Dhabi will reveal whether McLaren have learnt from it, and if they haven't, one question will linger long after the checkered flag. How many more opportunities can McLaren afford to hand to Max Verstappen before their internal rules cost them a championship they should never have lost?